They only come out at night. The monks, once peaceful brothers of the cloth, now twitch, crawl, and whisper blasphemies in tongues not meant for man. I am the last of the sanctified order, trained from birth to hunt the possessed who wear sacred robes and hollow eyes. But there are rules I must never break. Carved into me by fire, inked in languages dead and buried, these rules bind me tighter than the chains I use to trap my prey. Break them, and I'll become worse than the things I kill. I didn't ask for this life. I didn't choose to wake up every night to screaming winds and the coppery scent of blood in monastery halls. But I was born under a blood eclipse, marked at birth by a prophecy known only to the last remaining elders of the Order of Saint Namiel. Before I could walk, I was consecrated in salt and ash. Before I could speak, they taught me the rule of silence. Never speak to a possessed monk, no matter what it says. That's rule 1. It's not just superstition. I learned that the hard way during my first hunt. But let me start at the beginning. The monastery I call home lies deep in the Carpathian Mountains, nestled in a forgotten valley where the snow rarely melts and the bells toll at midnight. The brothers believe this place was once sanctified by the archangel Uriel himself. Now, it's soaked in secrets, most of them deadly. At dusk, we chant prayers that sound more like warnings than praises. The walls are lined with salt and iron filings. The windows are covered with stained glass depictions of saints in agony. And when night falls, the abbot locks us in separate stone cells, reciting the ancient benediction of severance, cutting our spirits loose from the flesh, if only for protection. I was 15 when I went on my first solo purification. That night, the storm outside clawed at the walls like an animal. Lightning revealed silhouettes in the courtyard. Monks who hadn't spoken in years walking with twisted spines and jerking heads. One of them had been my mentor, Brother Caldus. Before the possession, he taught me how to wield the ceremonial dagger, a blade dipped in oil from the Garden of Gethsemane, etched with prayers no longer found in any Bible. I watched from the bell tower, shivering in the drafty gloom, waiting for the signal. That signal is a chime, not from the bell, but from the dead. When a possessed monk reaches the final stage, he weeps blood, and the crying forms a sound that resonates through the old stone. The first time you hear it, it scrapes your bones. It came, a sharp, wet keening, like a baby crying underwater. I knew the time had come. I wrapped my scapular around my throat, whispered the second benediction, Rule 2, never kill in anger, and stepped into the shadows. Brother Caldus was waiting in the Chapel of Thorns. That's what we call it. The vines that crawl along its interior are not of this world. They bloom at night, and sometimes whisper names when no one is near. He stood before the altar, face hidden beneath his hood, his hands folded in prayer. A strange, sweet hum filled the air. At first, I thought it was him. But no, he hadn't moved. The hum came from the vines. They were blooming, scarlet, meaty petals, pulsing slightly as if breathing. I unsheathed the dagger. Child, came a voice, his voice. It wasn't a scream or a growl. It was calm, gentle, like when he used to correct my form during combat drills. I flinched. Child, you don't have to do this, he continued, his head still bowed. The rules are wrong. They lied to us. I hesitated, just for a second. Then I remembered Rule 1. Never speak to a possessed monk, no matter what it says. Do not listen, I whispered, stepping forward. The ground beneath my feet shifted, and I realized too late that the vines had coiled around my ankles. I slashed them. The blade hissed, as it touched the otherworldly tendrils, burning them away. Brother Caldus raised his head. His eyes were empty, no pupils, just two yawning abysses, infinite and flickering with stars. "Child," he said again, but now the voice came from behind me. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back, he was inches from my face. The dagger struck true, between his ribs, straight into his heart. But no blood came out, only ash. His body convulsed once, and then fell, twitching and dry like a scarecrow. The vines retreated into the walls. The humming stopped. I fell to my knees and recited the lament of severance. Afterward, I carved a mark into my arm, a straight line with two crosses. That's how we remember our kills. One line for every kill, a cross for every rule obeyed. I'd obeyed both that night, but things didn't stay clean. 3 months later, I was summoned to the lower refectory. That's where they keep the Book of Wrath, a living scripture bound in the skin of martyrs. It records the names of the possessed, written in blood. Names appear without explanation, usually days or hours before full corruption. That night, 3 new names appeared. All of them were still alive. Brother Elm, Brother Thassel, Brother Jonah. Jonah was a kitchen monk, soft-spoken, always humming old hymns as he prepared bread. I remembered his gentle hands placing dried herbs on my pillow when I had night terrors as a child. I didn't want to believe he was turning, but the book never lies. The abbot handed me a scroll. "This is your charge," he said. "A rare convergence. 3 at once. You must be quick and cautious. Rule 3. I recited with him. "Do not let the possessed see their reflection before death." This rule baffled me at first. I thought it was some poetic nonsense, until I witnessed what happens when it's broken. I prepared in silence. The hunt would begin at moonrise. The others locked their doors. I donned the vestments of night, a cloak woven with thorns, a rosary of bone. Brother Elm was first. I found him in the scriptorium, scratching Latin prayers into the stone walls with his fingernails. His lips were sewn shut with black thread. He didn't resist, just turned to me and smiled with those empty eyes. I ended it swiftly. Another line, another cross. Brother Thassel was different. He was waiting for me, sitting in his cell, eyes wide open, facing a mirror. I gasped. He'd already broken a rule. When possessed see their reflection, it's not themselves they see. It's what waits beneath the monastery. He started convulsing, babbling in ancient Sumerian. The walls bled. I had to stab him 12 times before he stopped moving. I didn't mark a cross for that kill. I'd broken Rule 3. Something followed me after that. I began seeing shadows in places they shouldn't exist. I'd hear prayers being said backward in the chapel after dark. The mirror in my own cell cracked from the inside. And Brother Jonah, he vanished before I could find him. For days, we searched. No sign of him. Then, a week later, he reappeared, standing on the monastery roof during a lightning storm, arms raised to the sky. He was singing, not a hymn, a lullaby, one I hadn't heard since childhood. When I got closer, I saw he had carved something into his chest. Rule 4 is a lie. There is no Rule 4. I rushed up the bell tower, hoping to intercept him. But when I reached him, he turned to me and smiled. "You don't understand," he whispered. "We are not the ones possessed. We are the vessels. The rules were made to keep them inside." Then he threw himself from the tower. I screamed. I never do that. But I screamed that night. They never found his body. Only his voice, echoing through the walls each night since. That was 3 years ago. Now, Every night I hunt, and every night more rules appear, etched into my skin while I sleep. The last one I woke up with: when the vines bloom red, do not pray. I don't know what it means, but tonight the chapel of thorns is pulsing again, and the petals are crimson. The chapel of thorns is blooming again, but this time it's bleeding. The petals drip with something far thicker than dew, and the vines have begun whispering in the voice of a monk who threw himself from the tower years ago. I should follow the sacred rules carved into my flesh, but one rule keeps changing every time I blink. And tonight, a long-dead monk is knocking on my cell door. I awoke to whispers, not like before. These weren't dreams or remnants of nightmare echo. This was real. The air in my stone cell had gone warm, humid, like someone was breathing over my shoulder. I turned, hand already on the dagger beneath my blanket, but no one was there. Just the sound of something wet sliding across the floor. Then I saw it. A vine, slender, red. It slithered beneath my cell door like a snake and retreated just as quickly. I leapt up and yanked the door open. The hallway beyond was dark, but lined with scarlet blooms, petals shaped like ears. No, not shaped like. They were ears. Human ears, wilted, stitched to the vine stems with strands of hair. I stumbled back. My skin burned on the left side of my chest. I tore off my robes and looked in the candlelight. A new rule had appeared, branded into my skin like raised welts. Do not let Jonah in. I stared at it in horror. The letters shimmered, like they were inked in fresh blood. Then, knock, knock. Someone rapped twice on the wooden door of my cell. I froze. Open up. Came a voice I hadn't heard in years. Calm, familiar, haunting. It was Jonah, the monk who threw himself from the bell tower. The monk whose body was never found. The monk who carved Rule 4 as a lie into his chest. I didn't move, not a twitch. I gripped the dagger and stared at the door like it might open by itself. But Jonah didn't knock again. Instead, he laughed. Not a madman's laugh, but something soft, melancholic, like he pitied me. You think the rules will save you? He asked through the wood. I didn't answer. Rule 1. Never speak to the possessed. But then something changed. He said my name, not how most monks say it. Not stiff, not reverent. He said it the way he used to when I was just a kid sneaking second helpings of bread. The way someone says your name when they remember you, not the thing you become. Come to the chapel, he whispered. They're waiting for you. Then silence. I should have alerted the abbot, woken the senior brothers. But no. Something about that whisper crawled into my spine and tugged me like a marionette. I was walking before I realized it. Down the monastery hallways, now overgrown. Vines slithered up the walls, looping around candle sconces, trailing across the floor like veins. The farther I walked, the more the monastery changed. Walls pulsed, floorboards moaned, and then I noticed something worse. Time was wrong. The candle flames flickered backwards, dripped wax upward. I passed a monk frozen in place, hands clasped, eyes shut, mid-prayer, but unmoving. No breath, no twitch, as if caught in a still image. As I neared the chapel of thorns, the air turned coppery and thick. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. My footsteps sounded distant, as if echoing from somewhere far deeper than the monastery. The door to the chapel stood wide open. Inside, the vines had transformed. Where before there were petals, now bloomed eyes. Hundreds of them, blinking, watching me, judging. The altar had changed too. It was no longer wood and gold. It was bone, twisted together, grown like coral. And at its base sat Jonah, still in his monk robes, still smiling. But his eyes weren't his anymore. They were solid white, no irises, no pupils, and they bled. "I knew you'd come," he said, and the vines around him coiled like they were pleased. I didn't respond. He beckoned. "Do you want to know what Rule 4 was meant to be?" I stayed silent, dagger drawn. He chuckled again. "Fine, then I'll show you." He raised his hand, and the chapel screamed. The walls bent inward. The ceiling split open, revealing a sky that shouldn't exist, black and swirling, littered with stars shaped like runes. The vines lunged at me. I swung the dagger. One vine struck my side, knocking me into a pew. Another wrapped around my wrist. I hacked. I spun. I whispered the benediction of severance through gritted teeth. Lux in tenebris, veritas in ossibus. The vines recoiled. The chapel convulsed. Jonah stood and screamed, not from pain, from defiance. "You don't even know what you're severing anymore," he roared. "You think you're cleansing the possessed? You're burying the truth." A burst of wind surged from him, knocking over the altar of bone. The vines went limp, and then he vanished. I collapsed. When I awoke, it was morning. The chapel was normal again. No vines, no blood, no stars in the sky, just broken pews, ash on the altar, and one thing left behind. A page, old, yellowed, torn from the Book of Wrath. I picked it up carefully. One sentence was written in blood. "There is no possession, only containment." I brought it to the abbot. He went pale. "This should not be seen," he muttered. "But what does it mean?" I asked. "Containment? Of what?" He didn't answer, just snatched the page from my hands and locked it in a reliquary I'd never seen before. "I'm sending you away," he finally said. I blinked. "What?" "There's a convent 2 mountains over. St. Rivals. They've requested aid. You'll go. Tonight." It wasn't a request. It was an exile. I tried to protest, but something in his eyes told me this was non-negotiable. By nightfall, I was packed. They gave me a new cloak, a pack of silver nails, a rosary soaked in blessed mercury. I mounted the mule they provided and departed through the back trail. I turned back only once. The monastery's bell tower loomed behind the clouds, and in one window, I swear I saw Jonah, smiling. The journey through the mountains was worse than I expected. Winds howled like dying animals. The path was nearly invisible. At one point, I passed a tree that had fingers instead of branches just for a second. Then it was gone. Near dawn, I arrived. St. Rivals Convent was massive, far larger than our monastery. Its windows were all shuttered. The spires were crooked like broken teeth, and its front gate bore an inscription. "We keep them dreaming." I didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But as I stepped through the rusted gate, I felt the air change. Not colder, not heavier, just awake. Inside, a nun greeted me. She looked to be no older than 20, but her eyes, those were ancient, like she'd seen centuries pass behind stone walls. "Brother Tavien," she said, calling me by name though I hadn't given it. "We've been waiting for you." "How?" She turned and gestured for me to follow. I did. The walls of the convent were lined with mirrors, but each one was covered with white cloth, and they hummed, faintly, like they were alive. She led me to a dormitory. Simple cot, wooden floor, bowl of water. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. "You were trained to kill what wakes." I stiffened. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "Here, you'll be trained to watch what dreams." Then she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. The water in my bowl rippled, though there was no breeze. And when I looked at the wall, the new rule had already begun etching itself into my flesh. It said, "Do not sleep near the dreamer in cell 13. I didn't know who the dreamer was, but I could already hear him breathing through the walls. The rules branded into my skin have always been cryptic, but tonight, the warning is clear. Do not sleep near the dreamer in cell 13. There's just one problem. The convent only has 12 cells. And yet, I hear a man breathing from behind a door that shouldn't exist. He calls my name in the voice of someone I buried. And when I approach, the door itself begins to dream. I spent my first night at St. Rivel's convent wide awake. Not because of the cold. It was warm in the room. Too warm. Not because of fear either, though fear always clung to my ribs like a parasite. No, I stayed awake because I could hear the breathing. Deep, measured, like someone slumbering in contentment. Only 2 walls over. It didn't make sense. The nun who'd greeted me, Sister Canta, had said this cell was on the convent's far edge. There were no adjacent quarters. And yet, the breaths were there. Wet, rhythmic, human. I traced the wall with my fingers. Cold stone, dust. But then, around midnight, I found something my fingers couldn't deny. A faint seam, a hidden door. At first, I thought it might be a closet or storage. But no, this door was tall, arched, old. I pressed my ear to it. The breathing grew louder, almost sorrowful. And then I made the mistake of whispering. "Who's in there?" Silence. Then a whisper back, my name. Not shouted, not screamed, just softly spoken, like a mother waking her child for morning prayers. I stumbled back. The new rule etched across my chest pulsed with pain. Do not sleep near the dreamer in cell 13. But there were only 12 cells. I checked that myself in the convent's floor plan later that day. Sister Canta confirmed it with serene indifference. We only housed 12. Always have. So what the hell was breathing behind that wall? The next morning, I joined the convent's matins. Their rituals were different, more somber, no chance of salvation. Instead, they sang lullabies in Latin, songs meant not to wake, but to deepen sleep. The nuns didn't speak much. Most wore blindfolds. They navigated by memory and faith, murmuring phrases like, "May the dream never end," or "Blessed is the sleeper who does not stir." I asked Sister Canta, "What exactly is being dreamed?" She didn't answer. Instead, she led me to a vast subterranean corridor beneath the chapel and showed me the veil room. It wasn't what I expected. No coffins, no relics, just a long hall lined with standing mirrors, dozens of them, each draped in linen soaked in wax. Beneath every mirror sat a nun, motionless, their eyes closed, fingers twitching over ancient rosaries. "They're watchers," she said. "They guard the reflections." From what? From waking up. I didn't understand. Not yet. Sister Canta pointed to a small shrine at the far end of the hall. It held a single cracked mirror, its surface blackened, etched into the frame. This one saw cell 13. I felt bile rise in my throat. I spent the next 2 days researching. In the convent's restricted library, hidden behind an altar, I found a text older than the monastery I came from. Its binding was stitched with faded gold thread, its title long worn away. But inside I found what I feared. The dreamer isn't just a person. It's a prison. It spoke of a monk from centuries past, Father Tylos, who unlocked a door of inner reflection. Not metaphorical, literal. He claimed to dream in places no man should walk. In his final writings, he warned, "When I dream, the world shifts, and in the folds of my rest, things slither through. I no longer know if the dreamer is me, or if I am the dream." He was locked away, in cell 13, but history scrubbed that cell from records. The rule etched into my chest hadn't lied. It had just remembered something the world wanted forgotten. That night, I heard the breathing again, louder now, ragged, and something else, scratching, like nails on stone. When I pressed my ear to the hidden door, I didn't hear my name this time. I heard Jonas, the monk who leapt from the bell tower, who vanished, who warned me about the lies behind the rules. And then, the door breathed back. It exhaled, warm and reeking of incense and rot, and the walls around it twitched. I backed away and went to the chapel. Found Sister Canta asleep on a pew, or so I thought, until she sat up mid-snore, opened her eyes, and spoke in Jonah's voice. "He dreams you now." Then she collapsed, unconscious again. I fled. The following evening, I met an old nun named Sister Barucha. She'd been at the convent the longest. Her mouth was sewn shut with golden thread, and her left eye had been replaced with a shard of mirror. She communicated via slate. I asked her plainly, "What is in cell 13? She wrote only 3 words. "The rules lie," then added a fourth after a long pause. "But only to protect you." That night, I was determined to see the truth. I returned to the hidden door, and for the first time, it was open. Inside was not a cell. It was a spiral staircase carved in a salt stone, descending into impossible blackness. The air smelled of lavender and meat. The walls were covered in moving scripture, verses that bled when I tried to read them aloud. At the bottom was a chamber, empty, except for a man, thin, pale, veins blackened, nails grown into claws, hair long and matted, his eyes closed, but twitching beneath lids bruised from decades of REM sleep. He was suspended above the ground, barely, like something held him in place by the tips of his bones. And around the chamber walls were mirrors, hundreds. Each showed a different monastery, a different convent, a different version of reality. Some of them showed me, sleeping, walking, dying, and in one of them, I was carving new rules into my chest with my dagger. The dreamer stirred and whispered, "You are not real unless I remember you." I backed away. The chamber began pulsing. The air thickened. My own thoughts warped. He opened one eye, just one, and from that eye, a hand reached outward. It grabbed my shoulder. I woke up outside the chamber, lying in my cot, breathing fast, drenched in sweat, but my left shoulder was bruised. The fingerprints of the dreamer were still there, and across my chest, a new rule was branded, so fresh it steamed. Never let him open both eyes. The convent has grown quieter. Sister Canta no longer walks the halls. Sister Barucha shattered every mirror in the veil room with her bare hands and hasn't spoken since. I asked the abbot. Yes, he's here too, though no one told me. And he simply looked at me with glassy, tired eyes and whispered, "What did he dream about you?" I had no answer, but I knew the dreamer hadn't finished. The rules are changing again. Tonight, I found an entire paragraph carved into my ribs while I slept. I copied it down before the wounds healed. It says, "If the dreamer dreams of your death, you will wake to find yourself already buried." I'm afraid to sleep, but more than that, I'm afraid to wake. Last night, I saw my own corpse stitched into the walls of the convent. Eyes open, mouth sewn shut. I'm not sure if I'm alive anymore, or just a shadow crawling through the dreamer's mind. The rules are no longer warnings, they're prophecies. One new message just carved itself into my back. The next time you see yourself, run. There's something wrong with my reflection. It started this morning. I was brushing soot from my robes after cleaning the lower chapel, and the mirror in the corridor caught me at the wrong angle. Only, it wasn't the wrong angle. It was the wrong expression. I wasn't moving. My head was tilted, mouth still, but my reflection smiled. Not with joy, with relief. As if he had been waiting for me. I blinked, and it returned to normal. But that wasn't the end of it. A new rule had etched itself down my spine, raw and trembling. Do not trust the one who remembers your name. Later that day, I tried to confront the abbot again. The same man who had exiled me from my monastery and mysteriously appeared at St. Rivel's without explanation. But when I entered his quarters, I found only his robe. Empty, draped over a chair. No blood, no bones, just absent. On the desk, a half-finished letter sat ink-wet and freshly abandoned. It read, "He has begun to dream in sequence. We are no longer safe. Even the rules are remembered incorrectly now. Tell Tavian he was never supposed to see." That's where the writing ended, smudged by what looked like a human tongue. I returned to the Veil Room that night, hoping to find Sister Barucha. She was the only one left I trusted, if only because she had nothing left to say. But when I entered, the mirrors were all uncovered. Every one. And they showed versions of me I'd never lived. In one, I was a boy, hunched over a corpse I couldn't identify, carving rules into its chest. In another, I was screaming at a monastery engulfed in flame, clutching a book of teeth. In another, I wore Jonah's face. Every reflection was dreaming, but none of them blinked. And then, behind me, I heard her voice. Sister Canta, but it wasn't really her anymore. She stood in the doorway, eyes gouged out, lips stitched crudely together with black thread. And yet, her voice came clearly, softly, inside my head. "You've been remembered, Tavian. You're no longer a sleeper." "I never slept," I whispered. "Yes, but he did. And in the quiet between your thoughts, he saw you. And now, he is forming you." The mirrors began to hum. One by one, they rippled. Reflection stepped forward, not walking, gliding, like thoughts forming into shape. One version of me looked twisted, feral. Another held a weapon I had never seen, something like a censer, but it bled with each swing. They were coming out. I fled. I bolted through the convent halls, past blind nuns whispering lullabies in voices not their own. The breathing behind the hidden door to cell 13 had become ragged, like someone choking on memory. The scent of lavender and rot followed me like a curse. When I made it to my cell, I found something impossible. I was already inside, sleeping, peacefully, mouth half open, whispering rules I'd never heard before. The me in bed suddenly said aloud, "Don't let him see your throat." I ran again, but not fast enough, because now he was awake. The bell tower rang. It hadn't chimed in years, but it rang 3 times, slow and heavy, like war drums echoing through fog. The sound fractured the air. The walls cracked, and every rule etched into my body began to shift. Literally, the letters twisted, rearranged, bled into one another. Some vanished completely. One on my forearm changed from, "Never remove your rosary," to, "Never wear your rosary near the dreamer." It was then I realized the worst truth of all. The dreamer isn't remembering the world. He's rewriting it. I needed to end this. I knew I had to return to cell 13, but not just to observe. This time, I would enter the dreamer's mind, force myself into his dream, and find the core. Whatever sick heart had started this madness. So I prepare the ritual. Sister Barucha, still mute, barely able to move, helped me draw the nine-eyed seal around my bed. I dipped the blade of my dagger in mercury and etched the forbidden glyph of Ex Somnium on my chest, just above my ribs. It burned like fire. I lay down and began to recite the benediction of descent. Simi Vidir Potest, Ego Sum Memoria Ius. If he can see me, I am his memory. The world melted into black. I was in the dreamer's landscape. Not a dream, not a hallucination. A reality made of thought, stitched from every sacred lie and every forgotten sin. The air buzzed with prayer. The ground was made of skin. I walked on faces, all whispering the same thing. You're not the first. In the sky, giant eyes, closed, twitching, and in the center of the horizon stood a tower. It was made of spines and bells, and from its top, he watched. The dreamer. He was me, and not me, a construct of everything I feared about myself. A version I would become if I abandoned the rules, if I accepted the false comfort of not questioning. He spoke without moving his mouth. You kill what I forget, but now I have remembered you. And then he raised his hand. The sky split open. I screamed a benediction again, over and over. I drew the blade across my palm and hurled my blood onto the mirrored floor beneath me. Reflection shattered. The tower crumbled. And still, he reached for me. I did the only thing I could think of. I broke my own rosary. The mercury-threaded beads scattered across the dreamscape. Each one exploded with divine fire, torchlight in the dark mind. And for the first time, the dreamer blinked. That was my moment. I stabbed the blade through his heart. I woke up on the chapel floor, alone, covered in ash. The convent was silent, too silent. I staggered through the halls. No nuns, no abbot, no light, just rows of mirrors, all shattered. Their shards bled softly, humming lullabies for broken mouths. Then I passed by a wall, and carved into it, in my own handwriting, were new rules. But they weren't warnings anymore. They were commands. Protect what is forgotten. Speak only to the silenced. Let no dreamer name you. And one final line, etched in deeper than the rest. You are not Tavian. Not anymore. I looked at my hands. They were mine, but also not. The scars weren't in the right places. The rules didn't match my body anymore. In a distant mirror fragment, I saw my reflection. It smiled again. Only this time, I didn't. I was trained to destroy what the world forgot. Possessed monks, cursed scriptures, sacred abominations. But I was never told that I might become one of them. The dreamer is gone. Maybe. The convent is silent. But something is writing rules in my voice now. And last night, I found one carved across a nun's back. Obey the one who killed the dream. That's me. At least, I think it is. St. Rivel's convent is dead. And I don't mean abandoned or desecrated. I mean empty of meaning. The sacred murals are gray. The altar bells ring without sound. The air hangs without temperature. Even the sky outside the stone windows has turned to permanent dusk, like the sun is unsure if it should rise or sleep forever. The nuns are gone. Not dead. Not taken. Just gone. Their habits hang like molted skin along the cloister hallways, and their rosaries drip with black wax. Sister Barucha left behind one final message, scrawled in blood on her slate. You weren't supposed to wake up in this world. I found the abbot again. This time, he was real. Well, what was left of him? He stood facing the broken mirror in the veil room, naked except for a crown of cracked bone cinched into his scalp. On the wall behind him, scripture had begun to write itself. Moving text, flowing like a stream of rules I couldn't recognize. I called to him. He turned, and I saw that his face was mine, but not current, not present. It was younger, the version of me that had arrived at St. Rivel's, the one who still believed the rules were for protection, not control. He smiled, and then he asked me to kneel. I refused. That was my first true disobedience. Every ritual I've ever done, every death I've ever dealt, followed the sacred rules written in blood and bone. I had obeyed out of purpose, out of sacred fear. But now, I was the rule maker, and I didn't know whose voice was using my mouth to speak. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, it wasn't the dreamer's world. It was mine. I saw myself standing in a monastery I'd never been to, but knew intimately. Its walls were carved from petrified monks. Its floor was made of old commandments, every one I'd ever broken or would break. There were monks gathered around a stone basin. Each held a dagger. Each had my face. And they whispered, "He who kills the dreamer becomes the next." I understood then. Killing the dreamer didn't end the cycle. It fulfilled it. I woke with a new rule carved into the underside of my tongue. You must dream now, so the world can forget. And as I looked around my cell, I realized nothing was as I'd left it. The architecture was older, cruder. The mortar between stones was blackened. Every crucifix had inverted. And on the back of the door, a sigil in dried blood I'd only seen once before, inside the dreamer's chamber. Something had followed me back. The mirrors had begun to regrow. In corners, in puddles, in my own pupils. Each day, I see new versions of myself in them. One is bald and blindfolded. One walks backward through time. One prays with tongues he bites from others. They all speak the same phrase when they see me. You are not dreaming yet. I try to destroy them. Smashed every shard. Burned the curtains. Smashed the frames. Dug out the floorboards where the veil room once stood. But they just reform closer to me each time. I asked the chapel statue of St. Rivel for guidance. Its eyes bled mirror fluid. And then the chapel sang. No words, just melody. A twisted lullaby I knew from Sister Canta's tongue the night she vanished. It echoed like memory pressed through bone. The statue cracked, and behind it, a doorway. Cell 0. I entered without thinking. It was colder than any place I've known. Inside, hundreds of pages floated in the air. Rules half written, some reversed, some screaming. The air tasted like rust and memory. And at the center, a bed. In at me, not sleeping, not breathing, just waiting. His skin was translucent, veins pulsing like whispered chants. Across his chest was carved a sentence that made my stomach crawl. Let him sleep, and let the world forget. I realized this was the first dreamer, and maybe the only. He opened his eyes. He didn't attack me, didn't scream or writhe. He simply stared into me. And as he did, my rules began to fade. Literally, each one unburned itself from my flesh. I felt lighter, emptier, more real than I'd ever been. He whispered something I couldn't hear, but I felt it in my bones. There must always be one. That's when I understood. If I stayed here, he could sleep, and the world would remember itself. If I left, he would wake again, and reality would crumble into nightmare. I had a choice. Stay, or kill him, and become the next vessel. I chose a third path. I offer myself to the dream, willingly, not as victim, not as replacement, but as author. I pressed my forehead to his and spoke the final rule. Let me dream of a world with no need for you. I woke up once more, but not in St. Rivals, not in a cell, in a forest. Sunlight, warmth, wind, the world untouched. No mirrors, no whispers, just birdsong and distant bells that sounded, right? There was a monastery behind me, new, pure, empty, and inside a wall, with a single rule carved in gold. He dreamed of peace. Let it be remembered. I don't know how long this world will last. Maybe days, maybe centuries. But I know this. The dreamer is finally asleep. And as long as I never open both eyes again, the rules will remain unwritten, and the nightmare will stay buried forever.